This week on A Lively Experiment, Gabe Amo wins the race for the 1st Congressional District with a surprising margin of victory. And a new ad campaign by the Commerce Corporation is raising some eyebrows.
A Lively Experiment is generously underwritten by...
Hi, I'm John Hazenwhite Jr. For over 30 years, A Lively Experiment has provided insight and analysis of the political issues that face Rhode Islanders. I'm a proud supporter of this great program and Rhode Island PBS.
Joining us with the analysis, attorney and former Cranston mayor, Allan Fung. Maureen Moakley, retired political science professor at the University of Rhode Island. And Bill Bartholomew, founder of the Bartholomewtown podcast. Welcome into this week's Lively. I'm Jim Hummel. Gabe Amo, a virtual unknown when he announced 5 months ago, scored a convincing victory in CD1 on Tuesday that surprised many political pundits, but not the candidate who ran a strong ground game coupled with a robust television presence over the past month, and he benefited from controversies that engulfed some of his opponents. Bill, let me start with you. You were there that night. What was the vibe in the room?
Excitement, and it was fun to see Gabe's parents there and his supporters, and everybody was overjoyed, and it was the complete opposite of the energy in the room at Aaron Regenberg's headquarters.
And you started out at Regenberg's,
which is where I started. Yeah. And look, that campaign at the end of the day was really well run. They found every nook and cranny of the district, and they were able to extract votes from it. And you could tell that there was an energy of not shocked, but aha, our strategy actually worked. It actually materialized into a victory, and a commanding one at that.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. I thought the results were great. When you talk about how his campaign was, he carried every municipality except for 3. So it was broad-based, which is really great. And his message was right on in the sense that he took a Raimondo thing, very liberal on social issues, but respectful, and mentioned how he wanted to support business. And I thought that was a nice middle of the road message that resonated obviously across the state. So it'd be interesting to see, the progressives were somewhat split, but I thought, for example, I wasn't sure what a great idea it was for Bernie Sanders to come in. I thought maybe that. I thought maybe he was pushing a little more to the left.
Well, we find out in retrospect that's the case.
Yeah, and that was the case. And 2 things that kind of really jumped out at me from, what Maureen and Bill were talking about, that progressive network. I think what you're seeing is it's not as strong. You still have a healthy base of that centrist Democrats that are in Rhode Island that didn't want to see the AOC, Bernie Sanders type that are going to the extreme left that is really dominating a lot of the, at least airwaves and sound bites that are going on nationally and even locally. Mm-hmm. So that was one of the things that, they predominantly, from a numbers perspective, they have influence at the State House because, that numbers game, you have to play it on both sides. But from an electoral perspective, I think it really showed statewide that they probably don't have as much influence as sometimes appears to be. And second of all, one of the things that, going through it myself, being the front runner sometimes isn't always, the best thing because you get the guns all trained on you. Yeah. We saw it with Sabina. She was the front runner. A lot of it was also self-inflicted wounds with how that was handled with the signature scandal. Mm-hmm. But with Aaron being the front runner, those last debates, everyone trained on him.
Well, that's,
so that's natural.
Happens.
That's natural. But what it also shows is negatives work. When you're going after someone, Gabe played it right. Timing.
Well, when you have somebody to go after, I think
Correct.
Early on people were like, well, who's really leading here? The one thing, and Allan, you hit it on the head. I looked at the numbers. Barrington 50-23, Little Compton, Tiverton, a lot of the outlying suburban areas that maybe thought. I agree with you, Maureen. Maybe bringing Bernie Sanders and the squad and all of that in, you got middle of the road Democrats who were like, I'm liberal, but I'm not that progressive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, the thing is, though, if you want to go ahead and call Sandra Cano a progressive, and I'm not convinced that everybody who voted for Regenberg is progressive. I'm not convinced that everybody who voted for Amo isn't somebody who would identify as progressive, but collectively, Cano and Regenberg got more votes total than Gabe Amo did. And the division in the quote-unquote progressive movement on the ground right now has manifested time and time again. Matt Brown, David Siegel, Aaron Regenberg, an inability to get somebody across the finish line. Now, one other thing is that we didn't have any public polling in this race. Academic polling, media polling. So
Internal polling.
Well, there was.
We relied on the internal polling, which again, it didn't ask about every candidate. There's always some question marks there. So at the end of the day, Aaron Regenberg may not have actually been the front runner. He may have always been in this position that he ended up in. And we have loud people on Twitter and in certain circles in the progressive movement who made it seem like he was, in fact, going to dominate this race, where at the end of the day, if we could have had more robust polling, we may have seen that, in fact, Mr. Regenberg's position in this state is far less than it was even in 2018 when he nearly beat Dan McKee in that lieutenant governor's race.
Well, the one thing I would kind of slightly disagree with you, because I think Gabe released that internal poll at the right time, and it probably showed exactly what the feel was on the ground.
But the timing was perfect.
The timing was perfect.
Yeah, and the other thing is that he released the whole poll. Sometimes you get an internal poll and they'll only tell you, you don't know what the questions are before, and then they say, well, who do you want to elect? And so you don't get the context. But he gave out the whole poll.
Right.
So it was legit, in that sense.
And from that perspective, I think that gave a lot of the people who may have been undecided, you know what, I'm going to listen more, and maybe, you know what, he turned out to be the guy. He was right there within striking distance to everyone's perception, and people started listening probably more to him and say, that's my alternative. I like what he has to say.
And he said, look, the poll shows that Aaron Regenberg's ahead, but we're within striking distance. So you get, so Allan, let me ask you, you've had a great name recognition. He started with none, and a lot of people thought maybe he should have spent his money earlier. Obviously, it was a good move that he didn't, like Helena Folks did.
Right.
And get out there. Well, he saved his money and back-ended, and I had to laugh at these commercials. You want to put your best foot forward, but it made, the pictures of Obama, the pictures of Biden, it made him look like he had the nuclear codes and like the keys to the beach house at Rehoboth Beach, right?
Right.
But subliminally, it's like this guy's a player.
Right.
So what do you think about that strategy, waiting and kind of back-ending that for the last month?
It worked. Because quite honestly, you've got to always be in focus with where you spend, how you spend, and the target message. I'm sure he saw in his polling and probably earlier polling that Obama as well as Biden played out well, and probably bringing in a little bit of nostalgia with Kennedy.
Yeah. And the other thing is that he's very well positioned. I mean, he's touting these credentials, but they're meaningful. In other words, it's a big deal. I mean,
to Rhode Islanders,
how much did the Patrick Kennedy ad at the end of the endorsement make any difference?
I couldn't tell. I mean, I didn't. I don't know.
What was interesting about it? They had to explain the Kennedy connection in the first couple of seconds.
Right. My uncle,
it's been a while, too.
It has been a while.
I think there's a lot to be said for the network that Gabe Amo has, the alumni, the Raimundo Alumni Network, and some of the surrogates there. Also, people like Mayor Zaya Comes-Vorvang in Newport, and the ground game there, the East Bay newspaper endorsements. It just worked well, and the I almost said Raimundo. The Amo network really came home to roost on that night.
Speaking of East Bay, as I was tracking the numbers during the day, yes, I am a lawyer, but I still, can't get rid of
You had the Board of Elections
Had the Board of
there,
Elections
right?
up. The East Bay surge early on showed, and for me, as I was thinking, it was either going to be Gabe or Sandra, who had a network down there too. So that kind of right there sparked that surge. I'm like, ooh, something's happening that's out of the traditional.
And interesting, as far as Cano was concerned, I mean, she punched up. I mean, she came from nowhere. She had very little money. She had a great ground game.
She did.
I will tell you what just blew me away was they interviewed Sabina Matos, and how many times have we talked about it? And I think that's probably what sunk her all of that 6 weeks of we're not talking about anything else except the signature scandal. Bill, that night she told a reporter, I was a victim of fraud. She played the victim card to the end.
To the end, yeah.
What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's well, I think she wasn't the best candidate anyway. That's just in my opinion. But I do think that if she had gotten up, and because she's sort of like an adjunct to McKee, if she had gotten on television early and said, I want to take responsibility of this, and really talked about it and say, I had some bad I had some bad advice, I wasn't careful enough to know who my campaign finance people were, but I have to take responsibility of this. And I do, and right early on.
As a candidate, you're representing a lot of people, and you feel badly. I mean, when you feel like you've let them down, but I would have come out and said, and not easy to do, easy to say from this desk, but to say, look, I made mistakes early on. We didn't vet the people. Ultimately, it's my campaign, and I'm sorry for the people who put their trust in me because I let you down. How tough would it have been to say that?
That's another good line.
That is what Rhode Island residents and everyone expects and wants from their candidate. That's leadership. Mm-hmm. No matter what. Anytime you're doing this, people are like, oh, wait a minute. What's really going on within that ship? That's not good. You're running for a major office, whether it was lieutenant governor, they want to see someone who's going to be accepting responsibility, knows what's going on, or even if they don't know, like Maureen's saying, will take the decisive action and be transparent about it. That's what voters want. I
think so. And I just want to say one other thing about sort of minority representation. I really think this was a fortunate turn of events because I think it's been difficult for blacks to get into public office. We've had a huge influx of Latinos who are very positive contributors to these states, great citizens, and they also do very well electorally. But the numbers and the demographics kind of overwhelmed the ability for African American candidates to get elected. And so I think this is a nice corrective, and it speaks well to the state, and I think he was the candidate.
I wonder how much play it also into people who said, I really would love to vote for a minority candidate, but Cano, Quezada, and Matos, and to a lesser extent, Stephanie Beauty don't do it for me. Do we really need 4 white guys again in Washington? And that may have tipped the scales for some people. What do you think?
I think that so. There's some folks who probably said that. They said, you know what, we had the 2020 awakening, cultural awakening, so to speak, in the wake of the murder of George Floyd and conversations that took place. And everybody said we need to have more representation on boards, more representation in elected offices. Well, then put your money where your mouth is. And that's something that I think some people probably said, yes, that's important to me. But I would say that no matter what color, no matter what background Gabe Amo may present as, at the end of the day, people voted for him because they saw him as a center-left figure who's well-networked, who can deliver as a congressperson, and not somebody who is performative or has a very specific agenda, be it left, right, center, or otherwise.
Okay, before we move on CD1, now we we haven't talked about the Republicans at all because we had 11 candidates. Now it's Gary Leonard, who was the endorsed candidate against Terry Flynn. As you know, uphill battle, particularly in CD1. What does he have to do over the next 8 weeks?
First of all, similar to what Gabe did, get who he is out there to the voters. He's going to have to, conserve the resources and use it judiciously to get his message about who he is, what he wants to do, and what he wants to accomplish for Rhode Islanders, because that's going to be an uphill battle in that district. But it's not one that's like, you can't overcome, because stranger things have happened. Who would ever thought that Sabina would, do what happened in her campaign? So anything can happen. It's going to be a shorter sprint, but he's going to have to really define himself, define what he wants to do, and why he's the better candidate than Gabe.
Be strategic in his debates, or do as many as he can to get out there?
If I were him, do as many as he can, because depending on, it's all about dollars and cents and how much he can raise to kind of get on air or digital. Yeah. Or earned media, and that's one of the ways you can get there.
And I also think that, the Republicans have been bogged down for a long time because of Donald Trump. I mean, he carried 11 districts in the last election, and the margins are tight, but it really matters. So it constrains legislators. It constrains people that are running for office because they have to walk this fine line between not saying anything, muted support for Trump, and not saying anything to offend his voters. And they've been in a difficult position. My hope is he goes away and the Republicans can rebuild the party as they always were. I mean, in other words, they were the social liberals. They were the fiscal conservatives. And if they move towards that, I think they really have to rebuild, but I think Donald Trump has done really damage to the Republican Party.
Alan, you know this for sure. I mean, we came up when we did debates last year. How many times did someone run up to you with a microphone? Oh, do you love Donald Trump or hate him? And you have all of a sudden you're in this binary
Trying to put
situation.
a brick around your neck, right?
Right. I saw Leonard yesterday on Fox News, and he was talking about Bidenomics and things like this. And look, those are obviously national talking points that work well. I'm not a GOP strategist, but if it were me, I'd be focusing more on, given that Biden's pretty popular in Rhode Island, what's the differentiation between yourself and Gabe Amo on major issues, whether it's foreign policy, health care, whether it's taxation, Supreme Court justices, the number of justices on the Supreme Court, whatever. Focus on those types of issues instead of the big talking points on a national level, and talk to Rhode Islanders. He was on Fox News yesterday, but he wasn't on WPRO in the afternoon, whereas Gabe Amo was on WPRO in the afternoon.
And I don't think, I think he has more ability to speak less constrained. In other words, doesn't have any background. If he loses, he loses. But at least he can be very straightforward with voters, and not having the Trump, noose around his neck.
And lean into who he is. They're exactly what you're talking
He's
about.
got a good story to tell,
very
too. He's
good
got an
story to
impressive
tell.
background,
Very
military guy.
background, family that's, from Rhode Island for generations.
Yeah, two good candidates.
Really, really impressive. And that's what he's got to lean into, tell that story. But, the one thing he should focus on is what's on the minds of people now. Because look, whether you call it Bidenomics or whatever, people realize that gas prices are spiking back up.
Yeah.
People are realizing that,
It costs a lot at the grocery store.
Those type of issues are the ones that really resonate. And, he's going to have to find the right messaging in CD1 to make sure he gets it out there and let them know what he's about.
All right, we talked a lot during the legislative session about the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights. We've been talking about a reform for years. Speaker Sakarchi said he thought this was going to be the year we put it over the finish line. It was not. And why are we talking about it again? Because that Pawtucket officer, Dan Dolan, who was acquitted actually of an incident down in West Greenwich, right? West Greenwich. He was pulled over for suspected DUI. There was a little interaction with some officers. That's the setup. And a lot of people have said, you know what, if the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights wasn't there, I understand there's only, sometimes it's just a bad apple or two. You were the mayor for many years having to deal with Leah Bohr. And so as you watch the Dolan situation, what goes through your mind? Because he's still on administrative leave. He's still being paid.
And that's the reason why, as mayors and as just a normal resident now, you want to have confidence in your police department and making sure, because look, there's a lot of power there. Wearing that badge, having, the power that they have, you want your officers, you have to be trustworthy and doing the right thing. And when you hear stories, not once, but twice, of what, Officer Dolan did, it outrages many people. And this is why I think there's been a continued call, especially from many mayors, about needed changes, not throwing out the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights, because it's a unique profession that we're in, but making the right changes to hold people accountable and discipline officers, or in the case of Officer Dolan, getting rid of officers like that give that 1%, because the 99% of officers are doing the right thing, that 1%, and holding these individuals accountable.
I wanted to ask you, when you think about this, I mean, they've moved along. Not many people are talking about throwing the whole thing out. And I don't understand why the legislature or the police union or who, that didn't opt and insist on changing this, because if this stuff continues, they may lose everything.
Right. Yeah, but the police union, Maureen, I mean, we saw the fire unions, the contributions. A lot of people get money from the police unions, and it was a line in the sand. It was almost, we don't want to give up anything because we think then the whole ship is going to cave. And I don't agree with that, but.
Yeah, there's actually a project that was done, I guess it was a couple of years ago now, where some civilian went through every member of the General Assembly's contributions and contacted everyone who took money from the police union and said, one, why did you take this money? And two, do you support adjustments? And again, that's the key word, adjustments to Leah Bohr. And there's a lot of conflict of interest there, and it's natural at a certain level, but it's also part of the problem here. But like you said, I mean, you have this Dolan. I mean, people talk about violence in Providence or whatever. I mean, if I'm out in West Greenwich, I'm going to look over my shoulder. What's this guy going to pull a gun on me or crash drunk into a vehicle? I mean, this guy is completely out of control, and it's outrageous that he's still a Pawtucket police officer. It's completely unbelievable.
Well, what do the people say when you talk to them?
Well, a lot of people gave money back. A lot of those legislators actually gave the money back or donated the money to some kind of cause, but it's just the nature of the beast. It's an influencing factor in the General Assembly. Is that the reason why Leopold didn't get addressed this year? No, it didn't make the agenda. There's probably something more deep.
I think there was some internal. Some people pulled their support, and the
Yes.
speaker didn't want to go forward. So the major, and we don't have to get into all of it, but you could only give a 2-day suspension without having to go to it. So some people said 10 or 14 days. Expand the panel because they think sometimes it's weighted a little bit more toward police, and to be able to talk about it. How frustrating is it now? If for you on the civilian side, you see something, the chief's like, I can't say anything, law enforcement officers' Bill of Rights.
It's got to be changed. I
Right.
mean,
There's got to be some type of discussion about it, or at least letting people know that, look, whether in my role as mayor, I was also public safety commissioner, working alongside with the chief and holding people accountable, whether you're a police officer or any individual that is within the city or you're and its employee there, is a prime responsibility when things go wrong. And you've got to at least let people, for transparency purposes,
Talk to 'em.
Talk to them.
Yeah.
At least give some type of information without the threat of, oh, you could just throw that case out if you don't say, you
could
say the wrong
jeopardize
thing.
Yeah. All right, let's do this. We've got a couple other things to get to. Let's do outrageous and/or kudos. Professor, let's begin with you.
my kudos go to Mayor Smiley and the fact that he negotiated the deal that the colleges, the nonprofits, the colleges,
Payment in lieu of taxes.
payments in lieu of taxes, are going to have to pay up. And I think that's the right thing. I mean, I think these institutions have plenty of money. And I like the idea also that he set up this thing where he's going to have quarterly meetings between residents and so forth. Because, Brown University is a fabulous contributor to this state. But there are problems that have to do with students and, apartments and things like that. And I think they have to pay up. And I think that, there's one interesting story where there was a bookstore. There were 2 bookstores on Thayer Street. I don't know if you remember. And one was there were 2, but anyway, they were in competition. But Brown wasn't paying any taxes, and they were. So I think it's got to be changed, and it's a right step in the right direction.
Yeah, to be continued. Bill, what do you have?
2 quick kudos. First of all, to everybody who ran in this election, this congressional election, and their teams. It's a courageous thing to run for office. I admire it greatly. Secondly, another kudos. PVD Fest is this weekend. There's been a lot of people who have been complaining about the changes to the festival. Some of it is with merit, and I think that some of the complaining is something that should be heard by the administration. Some of the complaints were heard by the administration, and this being the Smiley administration, and they made changes to the event. It's a marquee event. You'll have thousands, 10,000 or more people walking around downtown Providence. It's a great opportunity for businesses. It's a great opportunity for artists to be in the spotlight, and also the geography of downtown Providence is on full display there. Kudos for that festival existing.
Mayor, kudo or outrage this week?
Well, you took away my outrage. We discussed it. It was going to
Label,
be, the Officer Dolan situation. But I'll switch up to a kudo, and actually non-Rhode Island type kudo, but an impact on. We're coming into football season tonight and into Sunday this weekend. But Tom Brady, him coming back and the Patriots recognizing his 6 Super Bowls, the accomplishments that he left, not only on the field, but off the field with the impact that he had with the community. That's something that's great to see, especially as a Patriots fan. And by the way, for anyone that didn't notice, I'm not one of these fair weather guys. I had it when I was 10 years old, and you saw it on the campaign trail, me and that
Dick
Patriots
McPherson, right?
jacket, back in the day, in those tough years, Steve Grogan and all those years when
Yeah.
but
the old
kudos
Schaefer
to
Stadium, right?
Old Schaefer Stadium. And
Now listen, I hear the kids are coming back. What are the over/under on Giselle? I don't think she's going to be back, right?
No, I don't
Probably
think she's
not
coming back.
Yeah,
you know.
All right, we have one last thing to talk about in the remaining minutes. The Rhode Island Commerce Corporation, as if they did not learn by Cooler and Warmer, is putting out, coming up, let's throw this up on the screen. This is a stuffed quahog with a little bit of hot sauce, and this is going not necessarily in airports, but in air markets in strategic places around the country. And I don't know what else to say about this. I'm not sure that this is going to get people to come to Rhode Island. Bill, what do you think?
Well, it offends me as a vegan, first of all.
Well, that's a whole other issue.
It offends me as a comedian as well. But it's what's going on here? I mean, what we have Rhode Island School of Design,
Yes.
literally the best design school, arguably in the world here. And these marketing campaigns continue to not only disappoint, but to be disastrous. I mean,
Yeah,
what is
really.
this? You can't identify what this
That's
is.
twice now the Commerce is coming.
Yeah.
It's awful.
Well,
Yeah, it's awful.
Maureen?
And the other thing is, I was writing about this in another context, but Joe McNamara was on television, national television, condensing the electoral votes with a plate
For the
of
convention,
calamari
right?
for the convention.
Yeah.
A plate of calamari on the beach, where everybody else was talking about, justice and truth and so forth and so on. And the Washington Post said, "Well, this is typical Rhode Island. This is, they're parochial, and this is an example." So I don't know what they're going to say about this.
With all the things that we have, and somebody wrote an op-ed piece for Rhode Island Current, the new online news organization, and said coastline, history, food, and beyond.
Dells.
Yeah,
You've
exactly.
had Nibbles Woodaway that you could have thrown out.
I don't know
there
that we
people
can do
know.
that.
Come on.
I don't know.
That's
What-
the comedian aspect of me. So.
But we all get this when we go to other parts of the country, right? They say, "Oh, you're from Rhode Island," and then what's the next line?
Yeah, no, hokey,
Exactly.
Yeah.
Is that part of New York? Is the other one? I
Yeah,
get
yeah, yeah.
sometimes,
Do you go? Well, when I was in school in North Carolina, they said, "Now you're from Long Island," and they're like, "No, Rhode Island." Do you get out there by boat? So I don't know how much they're spending on this, but what would you, if you could do the ad campaign, what would you focus on?
Look, bottom line is, selling the ocean state, but I'm not sure this is the way that's going
it's
to be
awful.
doing it.
It's
I get it. You're trying to celebrate the food scene that we have, but it could have been a lot of,
But this isn't the food scene that we have. The
Right.
food scene that we have is much, much better.
Right.
Yeah, I think the thing, if you have to explain to somebody what quahog, quahog, you got three ways to pronounce it. If you have to explain it, then you're in the hole to begin with,
Just
right?
do something simple. I mean, this is off the top of my head. Refreshing. You know what I mean? Like, and show pictures of the beach, the art.
Well, I thought the fun
downtown.
size. Do you remember the fun size?
Fun
thing
size,
they
yeah, I
had?
remember
It
that.
was
Yep.
literally 10 or 20 seconds, and it
Right.
would zoom out.
Yep.
I thought that was good. And it's unfortunate, too, because it's been kind of a hit or miss now twice with the Commerce Corporation. So,
in their defense, I'm at least glad they're trying.
yeah.
Because
yeah.
look,
Yeah, but they have to do better. They have to do
All
better.
right, that's the word. Hopefully they're watching this. Folks, that is all the time we have. It's a quick 30 minutes. Bill, good to see you. And Maureen and the prodigal panelist returns. Good to see you, Mr. Fung. It is good to have you all. Folks, if you don't catch Lively Friday at 7 or Sunday at noon, we archive all of our shows at ripbs.org/lively, also our Facebook page and our favorite podcast. Wherever you go, take us along with you. Come back next week. We'll have all the latest political news and a full analysis as the Lively experiment continues. Have a great weekend.
A Lively Experiment is generously underwritten by
Hi, I'm John Hazenwhite Jr. For over 30 years, A Lively Experiment has provided insight and analysis of the political issues that face Rhode Islanders. I'm a proud supporter of this great program and Rhode Island PBS.